Hello and welcome back to the Azeem Digital Asks all-round digital marketing podcast. Who would have thought that a little project that I started in the first lockdown a couple of years ago would come back to a third season, thanks to incredible guests like the one I'm about to introduce you to and awesome listeners like yourself. And hopefully for the first time, all being well, I now have access to video podcasts on Spotify, and I'll get this on YouTube as well if my editing skills are up to scratch. So if you're watching, hello, I have a wonderful guest for you today, so I will shut up in a second. We're talking all about progression and management within digital PR. My guest is the awesome Jasmine Granton, who's the digital PR team leader at Evolve Search, co-founder of Chalkboard Creative. She's spoken at Brighton SEO, and she's basically a celebrity in this industry, so I'm very pleased to have her on the show. And if I could rate her out of 10, solid 9.9. The only thing that really lets her down is the fact that she chose to support Tottenham Hotspur. So if you do know her, just ask her about that decision. But yeah, Jasmine, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm glad we've got the Spurs stuff out early. Our relationship is built on kind of mutual hatred for each other, so it's nice to be doing something that isn't just abusing each other about football for a change.
Absolutely. And joking aside, thank you so much for joining me. For those people listening who do not know who you are, their loss, would you mind giving a quick intro to yourself for me, please?
Yeah, sure. I think you did a great job, but I'm Jasmine, so I'm the team leader at Evolve Search. Previously, I worked at Era Digital for a couple of years, kind of making my way through the different roles there in digital PR. And as you said, I'm also co-founder of Chalkboard Creative, which is a video production company. So spinning quite a lot of plates at the moment, but it's all good.
That's what we like. So yeah, even after hearing that, I'll say it again, thank you so much for joining me. So let's just dive in right to the meat and bones of the episode, talking about progression and management within digital PR. For those listeners who've got a broader digital marketing knowledge, would you mind giving a quick intro to digital PR, sort of like what it is, how long you've been in the industry, and the changes that you've seen throughout your time in digital PR?
Yeah, sure. So I think it's worth saying that a lot of what we'll be talking about today is really transferable across all of digital marketing and even non-digital roles, to be honest, because management is a big part of a lot of different people's careers. I myself have been in digital PR for about 4 years now. So I started off in traditional PR and then, like I said, went to Era. For me, the biggest changes has been, I guess, how we look at digital PR. It's gone from being link building, which was a small part of an SEO strategy, into something that's a broader topic. So for me, it's still an integral part of the SEO strategy, and we link build for that purpose, but it's also part of content marketing as well. It's become far more creative. So when I first started, it was a case of outreaching infographics and kind of giving journalists linkable assets. And whilst that's still a key goal of ours, we also look at other metrics like search visibility, relevance of links, and really just the change has been the change with Google and making sure that those links are as strong as possible and that they're kind of read by Google in the best way. So there's been a huge amount of change. I think the understanding from clients as well, it's still a relatively new industry. Again, it's changed from the kind of old school link building techniques that people used to use to what it is today, which is straddling the SEO as well as the traditional PR content marketing side.
Love that. Perfect. Thanks very much for sharing that. So in terms of progression and management, somebody listening to this in terms of where they are in digital PR, what routes are available for people to progress into?
I mean, I think it depends if you're looking at agency or in-house. I've been in-house quite a few years ago now, and then I've stayed in agencies for the last few years. So I guess it depends on what your skill set is. So within digital PR, there are a ton of different heads you need. So there's a really creative side, which is coming up with the ideas and working with designers and developers. And then there's a stage which is very almost journalism focused, of writing up the story, the press releases, the copy. And then there's the reporting, the delivery, the working with the SEO team to work out, whether a campaign was successful. So it really depends on whereabouts you sit on that spectrum of skill sets, and you can kind of be quite niche and narrow down your specialism. So I was an outreach specialist for a while and really built relationships with journalists and aimed to build the links, versus some friends of mine who are more data and research driven, and they'll come up with the ideas. So it very much depends on your skill set, but it also depends on what your end goal is. So there are ways that you can go down the management route, which is what I chose, but it's a great industry that you don't have to be a manager to progress. I don't think everyone should be a manager. There are certainly some really poor managers that I've experienced in my time. So there's also kind of strategy roles where, again, you can focus on what the bigger picture is for the client. You know, what do those links actually mean for them? I think sometimes in the industry, we get a little bit caught up with being like, oh, I built 300 links on this campaign, but you know, you need people to actually tell you what that means. Is it even a good thing? Because that can sometimes lead to, you know, negative things on sites too. So I think there are strategy roles, there are creative roles, there are outreach specific roles. So it really depends on what you enjoy doing, what your skill sets are, and then you can kind of hone in on those niches or do what I've done, which is go down the management route.
Brilliant. I'm going to put you on the spot and just pick apart and pick on something that you just said there. So in a second, I'll ask you about people who are junior and new to the industry, but thinking back to something that you've just said there, if I, for example, am listening to this and I'm just about to finish uni and I really want to get into digital PR, but it seems overwhelming. As you mentioned, you've got to be creative, you've got to be data driven, you've got to be X, Y, and Z. What are some of the most common misconceptions in your mind about digital PR that you'd like to just address right now? So for anybody listening who's thinking about getting into digital PR.
I think the biggest one is that you have to be good at all of it. I mean, if you're a freelancer, that's what I mean. I hang my hat to freelancers if they're doing all of those areas. I personally am absolutely terrible with data. You know, numbers is just not my bag. I'm definitely more on the kind of writing side. So it's really important to remember that you're going to be part of a team, and that whatever skills that you're lacking, somebody else will make up, but you'll also bring a set of skills that somebody else struggles with. So, you know, finding those teams where you're going to bring something, and you don't have to have the whole skill set. If someone's equally as good at finding data sources and turning them into stories and building relationships with journalists and writing, amazing. But that's not me. And I don't know too many digital PRs who can do all of it. So whilst it might feel a little overwhelming, I think it's important just to recognize your own skills and know that there's going to be somebody who kind of takes away from your weaknesses if you do have some.
7 minutes in, and this is absolute gold. Thank you so much. So elaborating on the point about juniors then, thinking about management specifically, the topic of the episode, if there's somebody who's quite junior in digital PR now, what would you advise to them to get their management skills? What would they do?
I think there's quite a lot of things you can do within the role that you're in. So mentoring is how I started. You know, I don't personally believe in just giving someone to manage and being like, see if you can do it, you know, trial and error, because that can be really damaging to the person who's on the receiving end of that management if you don't know what you're doing. So I would speak to your line manager and show interest in the fact that you'd like to mentor, or potentially think about putting together a training session on something that you're really passionate about and deliver to the team. Show that you've got those strengths of training and mentoring and helping people progress. I'd also be reaching out to other people on the team and seeing what support they might need. Check in on people if they seem a little bit off or down. It's really building those skills that kind of come naturally from empathetic people. You know, make sure that you're being a team player, but more than that, I think it's really important to mention that there are management courses out there. I personally haven't been on one, and I think that would have helped me early on. Paddy Mugan, who I used to work for at Era, is currently putting one on. Definitely check him out on Twitter, and I don't think it's live yet, but it will be going live quite soon. He's been working super hard on that. So definitely take a look at that. And any other management kind of training programs that are out there. And also, I think, you know, you can learn a lot from your manager. So speak to them and say, you know, can I talk to you about the one-to-one process? Can I pick your brain on how you deal with certain situations? And I think when somebody is getting to that point where they're thinking about management, try and think solution focused. So I think the biggest difference between a service provider, whether you're a consultant or an exec, to a manager, is that quite often you need to be able to solve the problem yourself, or at least come up with a solution. So to start thinking in that way, and also thinking about delegation, how many tasks do you have? Is there anything that you could be passing down to juniors and showing them how to do it and giving them that extra level of confidence and responsibility? I think with a lot of progression, it's about starting to do the job you want before you've got it, and showing that you've got those positive attributes that make a good manager, or whatever the next step is for you.
Nothing to add. Absolute solid gold. If I was personally in digital PR in a junior role, I would hit pause, rewind, press play again, and just make tons of notes. This is amazing. So I wanted to go back to something that you said at the start of the episode. And you don't have to go into detail. Feel free to share whatever you're comfortable with sharing. But you mentioned earlier on that you'd been through a few jobs last year, and you've been through different types of managers, good and bad. What for you makes a good digital PR manager or leader? What qualities do you look for?
I think it's the same thing that makes any good manager a good manager. I think my number one is trust. I know that the people on my team are better at their job than I would be at their job. And it's knowing what their skill sets are. And it's about realizing that everyone is really different. There are some people that I've managed who absolutely know where they want to be. They know what their skill sets are. And there's other people who are slightly more reserved about it, and they don't really see how strong they are. So it's about giving everyone a tailored management experience. I don't treat anyone on my team the same as somebody else necessarily, because everyone needs something different from me. So it's about, I think for me, a good manager assesses that and changes their approach and adapts their approach to individuals. But I think trust is the main one. Micromanagement is one of the main reasons I've left jobs, because I don't want to be spoken to in a condescending way. I'm an adult. I'm being paid to be here. It's not school. So I think attitude of managers is really important. And also giving people the freedom to change their role if they want to, and I think retaining people is all about letting them grow and letting them adapt and not holding them back. If someone says to me, I want to do this training course, or in 6 months I want to be here, it's my job to help them figure out how we do that. And it's always a we. It's not, okay, well, go off and do it. So I think it's about giving enough guidance that they feel supported, but also giving them the freedom to be like, where do you want to be? Like, tell me where you want to be and we'll get you there. So I think the managers I've had in the past that haven't been so great have definitely made me feel that I'm in my place. You stay in your lane. You don't, you do your job and you get on with it. Whereas I encourage people to try new things, to fail. There's never any telling off. I never hold things back for one-to-ones or anything like that. It's a very honest, open communication at all times. And for me, it's been vulnerable as well. I don't hold back when I'm a bit stressed. I don't, if I've got something personal going on that's going to affect me and my working day, I tell them, because I expect that level of transparency to be both ways. So it's just treating people like humans and having respect for your team. There's obviously some situations where being a manager can be really challenging. If somebody is not performing super well, it's also not being scared to have difficult conversations and acknowledging that, look, if someone's not doing well in my team, a lot of that responsibility is down to me. How can I help them? Do they need more training? It's probably not that they're just not trying, it's that they're struggling. And that's when I need to step in and do something about it rather than just letting them drown.
Absolutely. I don't want to talk too much because this is your episode, but that human side of it is so important. So I'm really glad that you touched on that. I'm going to put you on the spot again. Apologies. And there's no way to ask this question without making it sound like it's a job interview. I promise it's not. But for me, I'm thinking about what you've just said, and certainly in my experience when I've managed people, there has been this moment, but I'd love to hear from you. There must have been a moment where you've had a really difficult situation and you've overcome that and you've thought, okay, I'm ready to become a manager. I am a manager. So essentially, it's a long-winded way of asking, what's the most difficult management experience that you've personally had? How did you get through that? And how did you feel on the other side?
I think for me, the harder management experiences is when someone is going through something really personal, because it's quite hard as a manager to have the boundary of not overstepping and asking too many questions, but also being supportive. But I mean, at Evolve Search now, we have such a great culture of, look, if you've got something going on in your life, you deal with it. Work isn't as important as your mental health. Work isn't as important as family, things going on. And the last few years has taught us that even more so. So for me, I think the hardest challenge is making sure that the team's well-being is strong, because agency life can be really stressful, and work does need to be done and deadlines need to be hit, but it's balancing that with people's mental health and with their personal lives. So I think for me, I don't find it too challenging to deal with workplace scenarios, but when someone's got something going on outside of work, I find it hard not to kind of take that on and take it home. And I think, again, that's something that you need to be prepared for as a manager, is that you are everyone's sounding board. You're everyone's counsellor to an extent some days, and you need to be able to manage all of that stuff with delicacy, whilst also, you know, I've got a manager, I've got a boss to kind of pass that information up. So it's making sure that there are processes in place that the team feel they can come to me and talk to me about anything, and that there'll be a level of confidentiality, whilst also explaining to somebody else why someone's not going to be in for a few days. So I've definitely had situations like that where it's just taking me a little bit of time to have a think about, right, what's my approach here? How do I have this conversation with them? If they're off for a few days, do I check in with them, or do I just give them space? And I think all of that is dealt with just by communicating and that transparency that I was talking about before.
Brilliant. I'm quite enjoying putting you on the spot, and I realise that we are coming towards the end of the episode, so I'm going to give you one more. Everything you mentioned there about being personal and the human aspect, how do you ensure that there are boundaries between being personal but also making sure that the job gets done?
I think that's probably the biggest challenge, to be honest. But again, I do think it just comes down to communication. You know, in one-to-ones, I have a section on, you know, how are things in your life? Like, not everything is work related. So I always ask, you know, are you okay? How are things going? And that's not how are your clients doing? That's how are you, and making sure that people are okay. And being like hyper aware of, you know, whether people seem off. And for me, I work predominantly remotely, but I make sure to be in with the team at least once a month so I can really have some face-to-face time, because I think that's important. But in terms of client delivery, that needs to be done too. So it's making sure that people have the resource. People are so overstretched in agencies and so overworked that they burn out. So it's making sure to kind of catch that earlier on. So again, letting them know that negativity isn't a bad thing. You can come to me and have a moan. Let's figure out, reprioritize, so that we don't get to that point where you are completely burnt out and it's so hard to wind back. I think that's a long-winded way of answering your question, but essentially the boundary is, they're a human, they're a person, to an extent they're my friends, but also the client's work is really important. So having a good relationship with the client services team, with the account managers, to make sure that I'm accountable for the success of the clients as well, even if I'm not directly working on them. And I stay quite close as well, so I'll do my best to be in the client reviews, and I'll check over the work regularly. I'll look through link trackers and make sure that the standard is high. I mean, I'm super lucky that I have an incredibly talented team. It doesn't take a lot of checking, to be honest. They just crack on with their jobs amazingly well. But it has been a challenge at times. And again, it's just about being open and honest. And I think when you've built that foundation of trust with the people you manage, when you're giving them criticisms, or when you're telling them, look, you need to pull your socks up a little bit, we need to see a little bit more, hopefully it comes from a place of, I want you to do well, I want to help you progress, and I want you to help yourself progress. It's not a telling off because they're not performing.
Amazing, solid gold. And you mentioned it there. I was going to say it towards the end of the episode, but given that you've mentioned it, I'm just going to add to it. I think already from what you've shared so far, your team must be incredibly lucky to have a manager like yourself. And there's even though this episode is literally about progression and management within digital PR, you've already shared so much stuff that's so transferable across all the disciplines of marketing, that you will, which I think leads me nicely on to my next question. So when we were talking about the episode, you mentioned about how you can help yourself and how you can make sure that you're helping your manager to help you be promoted. How would somebody do that?
I think there's quite a few ways. Again, you need a good manager in order to do this, because they need to be putting in one-to-ones, PDP sessions. They need to be actively working on it too. But for me, I always was looking at the job spec above me, or the job spec I wanted. And a great task is to highlight in green all of the things you think you're already doing, highlight in orange the things that you think you've maybe done but need to work on, and red are the things, okay, I've never tried that before, I've never done that. And the red things are what turn into your goals or your objectives. So those go into your PDP. So if the next step up from you is leading on a client and you've never led on a client, cool. Leading a client becomes goal number 1, and you speak to your manager, how can I take on this responsibility? And being open about where you want to be, not kind of holding back because you think it's boastful. And bragging, like, you need to do your own PR. You need to come into one-to-ones with evidence. Like, you don't need to be writing constant notes. But, you know, I think especially as we're quite polite when we're kind of in these situations, but you need to be a little bit tougher and be like, look, I nailed this. I did this really well. I tried this and actually I didn't do so well at this. So I know I need to work on that. It's coming with a level of self-awareness, because I manage a team of 8. And it's quite hard for me to have tabs all the time on how amazing they're all doing. I've got so many Slack channels and so much going on. So if you can come to me and be like, hey, this month I've done this, 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 and this, I want to work on this, this, and this next month, I'm a step ahead and can help you do that, rather than having to like draw it all out of you. So make as many notes as you can, like have a spreadsheet with like monthly wins, have a spreadsheet with your goals and when you're hitting them. And for me, that's the best way. And also, and it's quite scary to tell your team to do this, you've got to have quite a lot of faith in the company you work for, but tell them to look at other job specs. You know, if they're going to be looking at other roles anyway, if there's a role at another agency that looks like your dream role and we don't have that role, tell me about it. What about that role is really exciting for you? Because we could mold your role into that. You don't have to leave in order to get it. You know, progression is kind of, it's not linear. There are so many different ways you can go, as we kind of started talking about at the top of the episode. So it's just about being really, again, transparency and open conversation about these things, and being really clear about what you want to achieve.
Amazing. Honestly, we could literally talk for hours on this. Digital PR, it's not something that I claim to know a lot about, but literally in the space of 20 odd minutes, you've taught me so much. This has been incredible. As I mentioned, sadly, we are coming towards the end of the episode, but I always give my guests a chance to sound off. So it's basically free reign. Anything else that you want to discuss, the floor is open, well, within reason, of course. So no Arsenal bashing. But is there anything that you want to discuss that we might have covered already in the episode?
I don't think there's anything kind of specific based on management. I guess in terms of what's going on, obviously Brighton SEO is coming up. I can't go, unfortunately, but I would definitely encourage anyone who is junior to get to events like that, meet people in the industry. I think the reason I enjoy this industry is because of the people in it. And I think the reason that I did manage to progress quite quickly was because I made connections. I learned so much. There is a ton of free information out of there. And I know that events like Brighton can be quite expensive, but again, speak to your manager, tell them that you're interested in going to network and to learn. And there are tons of free events, like long lists of them. So it can be quite daunting, especially if you are an anxious person or, you know, you're slightly introverted. It can be quite scary, but everyone is super friendly. So I would encourage anyone, especially juniors, to just get out there, talk to people on Twitter. I've made so many friends in this industry and have learned a huge amount from them. So yeah, I would definitely encourage that.
Hopefully I am one of them, fingers crossed. This has been brilliant. Before I let you go and enjoy the rest of your evening, the most important part is if people are listening to this and they would love to find out more about you, follow you on social media or connect with you, how could they do that?
At Granton Jasmine on Twitter. I'm on there far too much. So if you've got any questions, I will say as well, whilst it's not about me recruiting, I am always there to sound any ideas from, you know, if you need anyone to look at a CV, especially young women in the industry. I'm very passionate about helping young women make sure that they're getting a fair wage and that they're not being treated poorly as I have in past roles. So if you do need someone to talk to confidentially, just send me a DM.
That's brilliant. And I know that she means that because she really is genuinely one of the kindest people in this industry. I've got a lot of time for Jasmine, although I do poke fun at her, and I'll continue to after recording. On the recording, I will say that, listen, this is it. This has been an absolutely brilliant episode. Thank you for giving me some of your time and the listeners to share what has been absolutely awesome. I could not think of a better way to bring in the new season of this podcast. The next guest has got a very high bar to live up to. So from me, thank you very much for being a brilliant guest. I'll make sure to put all of your details in the notes of the show. And to the listeners, thank you so much for listening. We will catch you on the next episode.